Right now, as you're watching this, your DNA is telling a story that your family never knew. If you're Indian, there's a 1 in 3 chance you're carrying ancient Persian genetic markers in your blood. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. Those Persian ancestors, they might have originally been Indian themselves. This isn't just about ancestry. This is about a hidden truth that challenges everything we've been taught about Indian and Persian history. Truth so explosive that it rewrites the story of 2 entire civilizations. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this secret has been buried for over 90 years. Let me take you back to 1933. The place, Persepolis, the magnificent ruined capital of the Persian Empire in modern-day Iran. An archaeological team led by Ernst Herzfeld was excavating when they made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the academic world. They found ancient clay tablets, thousands of them. But these weren't ordinary Persian texts. As scholars began deciphering these tablets, known today as the Persepolis fortification tablets, something impossible emerged. The script looked familiar, too familiar. The words, the sentence structures, even the mythological references. They were strikingly similar to Sanskrit, the ancient sacred language of India. Not just similar, almost identical in many cases. Picture this. You're expecting to read about Persian kings and Persian gods. But instead, you're reading what looks like Indian literature, buried in the heart of the Persian Empire's most sacred city. This wasn't supposed to happen. According to everything we'd been taught, these were separate civilizations, separated by vast distances and cultural differences. Yet here was undeniable proof that something much deeper was going on. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because while archaeologists were discovering Indian cultural fingerprints in ancient Persia, modern geneticists were about to reveal something even more shocking about the DNA flowing through Indian veins today. Now here's where this story takes an incredible turn. Because while Persian DNA was flowing into India, something equally dramatic was happening in the opposite direction. Those Sanskrit-like tablets found in Persepolis weren't just cultural coincidences. They were evidence of what scholars are now calling the out-of-India migration. The possibility that ancient Indians traveled westward, carrying their culture, language, and yes, their genes into Persia. Think about this. What if the Persian Empire, one of history's greatest civilizations, was actually founded by people with Indian ancestry? The evidence is hiding in plain sight, written in the very names of Persian kings. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, was known in Old Persian as Kuru. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's almost identical to Kuru, the name of a legendary Indian king from the Kuru dynasty in the Mahabharata. This isn't just one name, it's a pattern. Darius, the great Persian king, comes from Dry Vahu's in Old Persian. Break it down, Dra meaning holder, and Vahu meaning wealth or good. This mirrors the Sanskrit words Dara and Vasu. The Persian king's name literally translates using Sanskrit roots. Xerxes, known as Zixis in Old Persian, means ruler over heroes. This connects directly to the Sanskrit Kshatriya, the warrior class, in UND, meaning hero. These aren't coincidences. These are genetic and cultural memories preserved in the very names of the rulers who built the Persian Empire. But if Indians were influencing Persian civilization, and Persians were contributing DNA to Indian populations, what we're looking at isn't just migration. It's a two-way genetic and cultural highway that operated for thousands of years. You want to see this ancient connection in action? Look no further than the Parsi community in India. Between the 7th and 10th century CE, Zoroastrian refugees fled from Persia to India, escaping religious persecution after the Arab conquest of Iran. These weren't just random migrants. They were carrying the genetic legacy of ancient Persia directly into Indian society. Modern genetic studies on the Parsi community reveal something fascinating. They're more genetically similar to each other than to other Indian groups, which makes sense given their tradition of marrying within the community. But here's the interesting part. Their genetic mixing with local Indian populations tells a very specific story. Y-DNA analysis suggests that the initial Persian migration was predominantly male. Meanwhile, mitochondrial DNA analysis shows closer connections to local Indian women. What this means is that Persian men married Indian women, and their descendants became the Parsi community we know today. The Parsis are literally a living genetic bridge between ancient Persia and India. They carry both Persian genetic markers and Indian genetic markers in proportions that scientists can actually measure and analyze. But the Parsis aren't the only ones. Shia Muslim communities across India also carry hidden Persian genetic signatures. Studies on Shia Muslims in Uttar Pradesh show they're primarily related to their Hindu neighbors. But they also carry detectable genetic contributions from Iran. The Dawoodi Bohras, a specific Shia community with strong historical ties to Iran, show significant genetic contributions from West Asia, particularly Iran, in their populations in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. These communities are walking, talking, proof of the ancient genetic highway between India and Persia. They're carrying in their DNA the story of migrations, marriages, and cultural exchanges that happened centuries ago. But here's what's really mind-blowing. Most of them don't even know this story exists. The genetic connection between India and Persia goes beyond DNA. It's written into the very spiritual foundations of both civilizations. Remember Zoroastrianism, the religion of the Persian Empire? The religion that worshipped fire as a sacred symbol, that believed in a supreme god maintaining cosmic order, that saw the universe as a battle between good and evil. Every single one of these core beliefs has direct parallels in Vedic Indian religion. Fire worship in Zoroastrianism centers around sacred flames that burn continuously in fire temples. But thousands of years before Zoroastrianism emerged, Vedic Indians were worshipping Agni, the fire god, using fire as a central element in religious ceremonies. Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism, is described as the guardian of truth and cosmic order. Compare this to Varuna from Vedic tradition, also a guardian of cosmic order. It's called Rata in Sanskrit, who ensures truth and righteousness prevail. The concept of Asha in Zoroastrianism, representing truth and righteousness, is essentially identical to the Vedic concept of RTA. Even the dualistic struggle between good and evil that defines Zoroastrianism has Vedic parallels in the eternal conflict between Devas and Asuras. What we might be looking at isn't just cultural borrowing. We might be seeing evidence that Zoroastrianism evolved from Vedic religious practices brought to Persia by early Indian settlers. This means that the religion of the Persian Empire, the faith that shaped one of history's greatest civilizations, might have Indian genetic roots. It's just like the people who created it. So how did this incredible mixing happen? The answer lies in understanding the ancient world not as separate, isolated civilizations, but as connected by migration highways that operated for thousands of years. The primary route was the Indo-Iranian corridor, running from northwestern India, through Pakistan and Afghanistan, into Iran. But this wasn't just a trade route, it was a genetic superhighway. Picture this, around 7,000 to 30,000 years ago. During the Neolithic period, ancient Iranian farmers began one of history's most significant migrations. They weren't just moving, they were carrying the seeds of civilization itself. Literally. They brought agriculture, animal domestication, and new technologies. But they also brought their DNA. As these Iranian farmers settled in the Indian subcontinent, they didn't remain separate. They mixed with the indigenous hunter-gatherers who had been living there for millennia. This mixing created what scientists call a genetic bridge, a blended population that became fundamental to Indian civilization. This blended group contributed significantly to both the ancient North Indian and ancestral South Indian populations. Essentially, Persian DNA became part of the genetic foundation upon which Indian civilization was built. But the highway worked both ways. Ancient Indian traditions speak of westward migrations too. The Rigveda mentions the Battle of 10 Kings, which some scholars interpret as describing defeated tribes migrating westward from India, according to tradition. Descendants of the great Vedic sage Rishi Kashyapa were tasked with leading groups westward to settle new lands and spread Vedic knowledge. These groups are believed to have settled in what is now Persia, bringing with them the cultural and spiritual practices that would later influence Persian civilization. The Iranian plateau wasn't just a destination. It was a major crossroads for human migration across Eurasia. Genetic markers, including specific types of mitochondrial DNA and Y-DNA, spread from this region into South Asia and beyond. Some evidence even suggests that this Indian influence reached as far as Anatolia in modern-day Turkey. The Hittites, an ancient civilization in that region, show linguistic similarities to Sanskrit and share cultural practices that could indicate Vedic origins. The Hittite storm god Tarhan bears striking similarities to the Vedic god Indra, both associated with thunder and storms. Could the Hittites have been descendants of Vedic people who migrated from India? Modern genetic science has become like archaeological detective work, but instead of digging in the ground, scientists are digging through DNA. The tools they use are incredibly sophisticated. Genome-wide autosomal DNA studies look at the entire genetic picture, revealing not just individual markers but complex patterns of population mixing and migration. Here's what the genetic detective work has revealed. Between 4,700 and 3,000 BCE, a substantial portion of modern Indian ancestry came from those ancient Iranian farmers. This Iranian-linked ancestry shows up clearly in the genetic makeup of the Indus Valley Civilization. People from Sarazm, an ancient farming center in what is now Tajikistan, show close genetic matches to the Iranian-rooted ancestors of modern Indians. This indicates a historical blending of cultures across this entire region. The genetic contribution from Iranian farmers is considered a major factor in shaping South Asian genetics. And this happened before the arrival of people from the steppes, before the migrations that brought Indo-European languages to India. In Gujarat, the genetic component linked to Iran, the Caucasus, and the steppes can make up more than 35% of total ancestry. That's more than 1/3 of the genetic heritage of people in this region. But here's where the detective work gets really interesting. Scientists can actually trace when genetic mixing occurred. For the Parsi community, genetic mixing with local Indian populations is estimated to have happened between 690 and 1390 CE. They can literally date the marriages that created this community's unique genetic profile. The precision is incredible. Y-DNA haplogroup J2 shows up with higher frequency among some Shia Muslims in India compared to upper caste Hindu groups. Haplogroup L, associated with the Indus Valley Civilization, appears more frequently among Dravidian language speakers than Indo-Aryan speakers. Each genetic marker tells part of the story, like puzzle pieces revealing the bigger picture of how Persian and Indian DNA became intertwined over thousands of years. Now, here's the question that should be bothering you. If this evidence is so compelling, if the genetic and archaeological proof is so clear, why don't more people know about this? Why isn't the out of India theory, the idea that ancient Indians migrated westward and influenced Persian civilization, more widely accepted? The answer might surprise you. It's not because the evidence is weak, it's because the evidence challenges too many established narratives. Mainstream archaeology has been reluctant to accept the Vedas, ancient Indian texts, as historical documents. They're treated as mythology, not as potential records of actual migrations and cultural exchanges. But what if the Vedas are exactly that? Historical records written in poetic form. What if texts like the Rig Veda actually document the westward migrations that brought Indian culture and genetics to Persia? The resistance goes deeper than academic caution. The story of Indian influence on Persian civilization challenges the entire framework of how we understand ancient history. It suggests that the flow of civilization wasn't just from west to east, as traditionally taught, but from east to west as well. This two-way cultural highway model doesn't fit neatly into simplified historical narratives. It's messy, complex, and requires acknowledging that ancient civilizations were far more interconnected than we've been taught. There's also a more uncomfortable truth, recognizing significant Indian influence on Persian civilization would require rewriting textbooks, reconsidering established timelines, and admitting that our understanding of ancient history might be fundamentally incomplete. Mainstream media often favors simpler, more conventional stories that don't disrupt accepted history. Complex theories about bidirectional cultural influence between India and Persia are harder to explain and potentially more controversial. But the genetic evidence doesn't care about academic politics or simplified narratives. DNA tells the story of human migration and mixing, whether we're ready to hear it or not. If you're of Indian descent, there's a significant chance you're carrying Persian genetic markers in your DNA. Those aren't foreign genes. They're part of your ancient heritage, part of the genetic foundation that helped create Indian civilization. If you're of Iranian or Persian descent, your cultural and genetic heritage might have deeper Indian roots than you ever imagined. The civilization you're proud of might have been built, in part, by people who originally came from the Indian subcontinent. But more than that, this story challenges us to think differently about identity, about heritage, about what it means to belong to a particular culture or civilization. Your DNA is carrying conversations that happened thousands of years ago. Genetic conversations between ancient farmers and hunter-gatherers, between migrants and settled populations, between people who spoke different languages but shared enough humanity to create families together. The Persian DNA in Indian populations represents thousands of individual human stories. Stories of people who left their homelands, who met and married people from different cultures, who created children that carried both genetic heritages forward into the future. These aren't abstract population movements. These are love stories, survival stories, adventure stories written in genetic code and passed down through thousands of generations to reach you today. When you understand this, ancestry becomes less about drawing lines between us and them, and more about recognizing the incredible interconnectedness of human history. If millions of Indians carry Persian DNA, and if Persian civilization itself has Indian genetic and cultural roots, what does this mean for how we understand human history? First, it means that the boundaries we draw between civilizations are often artificial. India and Persia weren't separate, distinct cultures that occasionally interacted. They were part of a continuous cultural and genetic landscape that operated for thousands of years. Second, it suggests that our understanding of ancient migrations is probably wrong. Instead of thinking about one-way movements of people from one place to another, we should be thinking about circular patterns of migration, where people moved back and forth across regions over many generations. Third, it challenges the entire concept of pure ethnic or cultural identities. If Persian civilization has Indian roots and Indian populations have Persian DNA, then what we're really looking at is thousands of years of mixing, blending, and cultural exchange. This has modern implications too. In a world where nationalism and ethnic identity are often used to divide people, the genetic evidence tells a different story. It tells us that we're all mixed, all connected, all carrying the genetic heritage of multiple ancient civilizations. The Persian DNA in Indian populations, it's part of the foundational genetic heritage that helped create Indian civilization itself. Similarly, the Indian cultural influences in Persian civilization are unborrowed elements. They were part of the original genetic and cultural DNA of Persia. But there's an even bigger question. If this kind of deep, bidirectional cultural and genetic exchange happened between India and Persia, where else did it happen? How much of what we think we know about ancient civilizations is based on artificial boundaries that didn't actually exist? How many other pure civilizations are actually the product of complex mixing and migration patterns that we haven't fully understood? What does this mean for you personally? If you're of Indian descent, there's a significant chance you're carrying Persian genetic markers in your DNA. Those aren't foreign genes. They're part of your ancient heritage, part of the genetic foundation that helped create Indian civilization. If you're of Iranian or Persian descent, your cultural and genetic heritage might have deeper Indian roots than you ever imagined. The civilization you're proud of might have been built, in part, by people who originally came from the Indian subcontinent. But more than that, this story challenges us to think differently about identity, about heritage, about what it means to belong to a particular culture or civilization. Your DNA is carrying conversations that happened thousands of years ago. Genetic conversations between ancient farmers and hunter-gatherers, between migrants and settled populations, between people who spoke different languages but shared enough humanity to create families together. The Persian DNA in Indian populations represents thousands of individual human stories. Stories of people who left their homelands, who met and married people from different cultures, who created children that carried both genetic heritages forward into the future. These aren't abstract population movements. These are love stories, survival stories, adventure stories written in genetic code and passed down through thousands of generations to reach you today. When you understand this, ancestry becomes less about drawing lines between us and them, and more about recognizing the incredible interconnectedness of human history. We started this journey with a simple question. Why do millions of Indians have Persian DNA and not know it? The answer turned out to be much more complex and fascinating than anyone could have imagined. It's not just that Indians have Persian DNA, it's that the relationship between Indian and Persian civilizations represents one of history. as most sophisticated examples of bidirectional cultural and genetic exchange, the archaeological evidence from Persepolis, the genetic analysis of modern populations, the linguistic connections between Sanskrit and Old Persian, the religious parallels between Vedic traditions and Zoroastrianism. All of it points to a shared heritage that goes back thousands of years. But here's my challenge to you. Don't just accept this story. Question it. Research it. Look into your own family history and see what genetic surprises might be hiding there. More importantly, ask yourself what other historical narratives might be incomplete. What other civilizations might have complex bidirectional relationships that we haven't fully understood. The story of Persian DNA and Indian populations is just one thread in the incredibly complex tapestry of human migration and cultural exchange. How many other threads are waiting to be discovered? Your DNA is a library of human history. The Persian genetic markers in Indian populations are just one chapter in that library. What other chapters are waiting to be read? The next time someone talks about pure cultures or separate civilizations, remember this story. Remember that the greatest civilizations in human history were built not through isolation, but through connection, mixing, and the beautiful complexity that emerges when different peoples come together to create something new. That is the real lesson of Persian DNA in Indian populations. We're all more connected than we know. And that connection is our strength, not our weakness. Thanks for watching.